All right, it's enough for me to go on. So I think we'll get started since it's 3 o'clock. And welcome to Emily and Asma who are joining us. So great to see you. And I'm Erica Beckler, Associate Professor of English, and I focus on Shakespeare in the department. And I'll be your moderator for today. Let me introduce our panelists. We have 3 doctoral students, 2 of whom were MAs here at Northeastern, and 1, Josh, who was a BA at Northeastern and not even an English major. He was an English minor. So I thought his pathway would be particularly interesting, especially if any undergraduates were joining. Rhya is a second-year student at UT Austin. She studied at Northeastern with Nicole Aljo. Her research field involves 20th and 21st century Black literature, particularly focusing on Black women writers and the Black diaspora. Her advisor at Texas is Samantha Pinto, and she also works in disability studies with Allison Kafer. Kyle Oddis is a 4th-year student at doctoral student at Northeastern. Her advisor is present, Professor Neil Lerner. Her focus is on writing assessment, writing curriculum and pedagogy, and institutional history and culture. Josh Kruchten is a 2nd-year student at NYU as of last month, ABD. Woo-hoo. His advisors are John Guillory and Paula McDowell. He focuses on 16th century literature. And finally, we have joining us Professor Elizabeth Dillon of the English department, who is here in her capacity as a member of the Graduate Studies Committee to give a kind of faculty back-end view of the admissions process. So what we'll do to start out with, we'll have each panelist talk for about 10 minutes if they have 10 minutes worth of information to share about their pathways, and followed by Professor Dillon's comments, and feel free to talk with each other so that this is a conversation afterwards. And then of course, Emily and Asma, you are invited to follow up with questions. All right, so why don't we start in the order, proceed in the order in which I introduced everybody. So beginning with Rhya.
Right, muted. So hello everyone again, my name is Rhya. Like Professor Beckler said, I'm currently at UT Austin. So I graduated from Northeastern's MA program in 2019. When I initially applied, I was looking for a terminal MA. I graduated with my bachelor's in 2013, and then I spent 3 years teaching middle school English. And in my BA, I focused a lot on close reading, and I didn't really have a ton of background in like theory or literary criticism. At that time, I was also like really interested in modernism. Specifically like F. Scott Fitzgerald. So having that gap between my BA and MA, I was kind of feeling like I needed to explore my interests a little bit more because I was thinking they might shift. I knew that I wanted to do a PhD ultimately, but I just like didn't feel ready. So I applied again to terminal MAs with that goal in mind to kind of get more of like a theory background. I think being at Northeastern like made it possible for me to go on just in like getting that theoretical background, getting more familiar with literary criticism and what that looked like as a field, doing it myself as well that I hadn't had for my MA or for my BA. Another like thing that I thought was really helpful about being at Northeastern is that it did give me a lot more confidence moving on. I think that imposter syndrome is something that like affects everyone all the time really frequently. And I had it like really, really bad in my MA. Like I would just ask my professors, like, should I just drop out? Like, am I doing this right? Do you think I like have the ability to like learn all this stuff? Is it even possible for me to like get to where I need to be in 6 years. And I think just like learning how grad school worked in the MA made it so that way when I started my PhD, it was just a lot less of that self-doubt and kind of just more confidence in knowing like, I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses, like these are all things I can work on, these are skills that I can build. And that has like just been really helpful with like navigating a program that can at times be a bit more competitive. When I came to Northeastern, I, like I said, knew I wanted to do the PhD. So I kind of, sorry, my dog might come up on my lap in a minute. There we go, or else he's gonna bark. This is August. So yeah, I knew I wanted to do the PhD, so I kind of used my time at Northeastern a bit strategically, thinking about that as an end goal. So that like looked like whenever I was writing seminar papers, I was always trying to like explore things that were really specific to my interests or things that I thought might be my interests, and kind of working toward revising things early on in the program. In terms of like thinking about what those interests were, it was really helpful to work with Professor Nicole Aljo as her GRA for some time. I went to her office hours a lot and just talked to her about like my interests, questions I had, and she was someone, along with Unsong Kim, who just really helped me like figure out what it was that I was interested in. Those two also really encouraged me to like go out and apply to conferences, which I know sucks right now because it's not the same experience with COVID and everything. But it was really helpful to go to grad student conferences. I also went to NEMLA during my time at Northeastern to just like explore different panels and see what other people were talking about in fields that I like thought I might be interested in. When it came to thinking about letters of recommendation, even though I came into the program planning to apply for the PhD, it was just kind of a pretty natural and organic thing that happened. The professors that I spoke to the most, I would just go to them, ask them for advice, ask them to talk through ideas with me, were the ones who naturally emerged as my letter writers, just because we had already had that relationship and they just had like a genuine knowledge of my work. When it came to actually applying, I was a bit neurotic about it. I'm gonna be honest. I don't know that this is what everyone does, so like take this with a grain of salt. But I really started researching from when I started at Northeastern, just like thinking about what kind of program do I want to be in? Do I want to do more cultural studies? Do I want to go into Black studies? Do I want to go into American studies, women and gender studies? Because the field that I'm in can kind of dovetail with all of those. So I started doing that research early and just like exploring kind of loosely. I would say I like really buckled down and did like serious work for it during the summer before my second year in the master's. So when I was a master's student, it was a full 2-year program. So I was a full 2 years and I started like that summer. When I was picking schools, I ultimately decided that I wanted to stay in English for a lot of reasons. But as I was looking at other schools, I did look for programs that had strong Black studies, women and gender studies programs that I could kind of draw into, knowing that like I did the WGS certificate at Northeastern and I'm doing a Black studies certificate now where I am. It's been really useful to be able to work with faculty members in my department and outside of my department for my projects. I looked for, of course, like you probably know, faculty who are working in my field. I looked for at least 3 in every school I applied for. Another thing that I also looked for was diversity in the faculty, because I wanted to be at a school that was going to support my interests in Black studies, in Black literary studies, and me as like a Black scholar. So I looked for diversity in faculty. I should have looked more for diversity in the student body, but that's something I would also look for if I were looking now. When it came to the statement of purpose, hold on, he's gonna jump now. All right, I think he's gone for the rest of the time. When it came to my statement of purpose, I think that was the document that I changed the most when I was applying to PhDs as opposed to my master's. I don't really know what I did with my master's. I read it last night and was really embarrassed. It was just a lot of like personal narrative, whereas with the statement of purpose for the PhD, it was kind of more of like an article pitch, I might even say. Like I was really pitching the specific ideas I wanted to work with. I really tried to situate myself in the fields I was interested in. So like even more than just Black studies, like thinking about debates within Black studies that I might be interested in weighing in on and where I wanted to kind of intervene, and saw myself doing that. I will be honest and say that this is like the document that I went through the most rounds of revision with. You might know these people, Alana Prince, Abby Levesque. They looked at my statements like many, many times. Professor Lerner also looked at my statement. Thank you for doing that. It was successful. So as it, like, I just got tons and tons of eyes on it and went through so many rounds of revising that. If I were applying again the things that I would do differently, and I think this is, yeah, from my undergrad, I was told how competitive PhD admissions were, which I think is true. It is really competitive, as we know. But that led me to apply to like way too many schools the first time. I was trying to there were people for me to work with everywhere I applied, but I think I could have focused on the fit a lot more, just in like one, saving money, and two, like making the applications I did put in even stronger. So I would say I would apply to fewer. I would also be a bit more strategic with applying to better programs. Like I talked about confidence earlier, I was like really doubting my abilities. So I applied to schools that were like much lower ranked than Northeastern, kind of just like hoping I would get something. If I were applying again, I would not do that. I would probably stick to like rankings around Northeastern and higher, just because like Northeastern's master's program is like phenomenal. And if you go through it and graduate through it, you will be well prepared to do the PhD. So I think just like having that confidence in myself and yourself as you're applying is like an important thing. I would also, looking back, do more work with my writing sample. I said that I focused a lot on my statement of purpose, which meant that I did less revisions of my writing sample. If I were doing that again, I would want to try to better communicate with existing scholarship in my field and better communicate with the kind of theories that I was looking at, while also still incorporating that close reading. And then the last thing I would say is I used Interfolio as a way to kind of make letter writing easier. My only like warning with that I like really messed up on is I researched who would accept it, and some schools just didn't say that they wouldn't accept it. So I found out like at the very last minute they wouldn't accept it. So my like letter writers were like phenomenal people who came through like at the very last minute and submitted manually. But I would just put like a warning on Interfolio. A great tool, but also like comes with caveats. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhya. That covered a lot of ground. And Kyle and Josh, if you feel like you're duplicating some of that, that's fine. Maybe just spend a little bit less time on that portion. Kyle.
All right. So I think my experience sort of like front to back was actually pretty different. So I graduated from Northeastern's MA in 2015. So I actually came to Northeastern after deciding not to pursue an MFA in poetry at the time. And so I came into Northeastern actually in literary studies. So my MA, I focused on American poetry, and I worked closely with Professor Davis, Theo Davis, for my master's thesis. And it was also 2 years for the program at the time. And during my master's, I worked in the writing center, and that's how I met Professor Lerner, and we've been working together ever since. And I think when I did the MA, I came in wanting to do literature and literary studies, and my interest really evolved over the course of doing the MA, and I was in composition and rhetoric classes. In those classes, I didn't know what comprat was. Similar to Rhya, I really in undergrad didn't have much exposure at all to any kinds of theory whatsoever. My undergrad institution was a small liberal arts institution, and I focused on creative writing. So I really had no background for that at all. So when I came to Northeastern and just through coursework, I kind of realized that I had interests in Comp Ret, and through taking courses with Maya Poe and Neil and others, I just kind of realized that that sort of aligned more with what I was actually interested in doing in kind of my actual like on ground work. So then I was volunteering with 826 Boston, and that's a nonprofit in Boston, and I interned with them. And so my interest, even though I did my master's thesis on poetry and literature, I ended up applying to PhDs in rhetoric and composition. So I had already developed relationships with Neil and Maya throughout coursework and other kinds of work in the writing center and all of that. So they ended up writing letters for me, and Professor Davis also wrote a letter for me. So it was kind of interesting because I had my letter writers were coming from different fields. Part of me at the time, I wasn't really sure either, where I kind of wanted to go. So my direction was a little bit, I guess, confused at the time. And I actually took 2 years between my MA and starting my PhD. So I was teaching so I had the MA, and I got a position teaching freshman composition type courses at a local Massachusetts institution. And so kind of through that experience, I guess I figured out a little bit more sort of what I wanted to study, and I became super interested in curriculum and pedagogy, and the interest in assessment and all that stuff kind of developed later after reading and conferences and just conversations and discussions and other work experience that I'd had. So I mean, I've worked pretty consistently throughout undergrad into the MA and into the doctoral program. And I think like my outside experiences, like my extracurricular experiences, actually influenced where I took my work. So I was really kind of eager to take on a lot of different opportunities that came up with various different types of research positions and other administrative work. So I ended up assistant directing the Writing Center, starting my PhD, and I think like just all of that pretty much came together and influenced the direction of my work. I think when I was applying to the PhD program, I was really kind of preoccupied with teaching, and I didn't fully even know how invested I totally was at the time in applying. And I think that that affected the way that I went through the application process. I really wanted to be back at Northeastern because I'd already developed really close relationships, mentorship relationships with Neil and with Maya, especially Maya Poe. And so I felt that if I was going to do a PhD, the faculty that I was working with was going to be extremely important to me. And it seemed like a huge risk to me to sort of go into another program where I wasn't sure that, the faculty that I would be working with had, my best interest in mind, and that I wanted to make sure that I would still get the kind of really wonderful mentorship that I got at Northeastern while I was doing my MA. So I really was hoping to get into Northeastern and to come back. And I actually only applied to 2 other programs. And part of that was because I didn't have the money, first of all. And I also was really limited on time. So I think if I were to go back and kind of reapply again, I think the biggest benefit in my mind to applying to multiple programs, if you have the funds available to do that, is, it's about sort of like leverage, I guess. Even though I knew I wanted to go to Northeastern, had I gotten into additional programs, I might have been able to negotiate my stipend or my contract better in terms of like funding. And I think that that was sort of the biggest kind of shortcoming, I guess, in the way I approached the application process. So even though I had an idea of where I was really invested in going, I didn't have as much space for negotiation when I was accepted because I didn't have other leverage, I guess. So I think part of that had to do with just sort of, again, as I said, I wasn't entirely sure like exactly what I wanted. So it was harder for me to apply with like as much focus as I think I otherwise could have. But I think it all worked out in the end. I'm really happy here. But I think that the statement, in terms of the statement, like Rhya said, my MA statement was it was like pretty personal anecdote kind of based, and it was narrative. It was mostly narrative based. And then in applying to the PhD, I definitely had other eyes on it. And I actually spent quite a bit of time working with another prior PhD student, Heather Falconer, who looked at my statement, and she really actually sat down with me and had a conversation with me about, what I really was hoping to get, and making sure that, like, even though I wasn't totally sure of my direction or program of research, she was like, don't do a PhD just to do it, So she really helped me get clear about, what I felt I could contribute or learn in the process. And I think that that was an important part of writing that statement for me. Yeah, I think that I pretty much covered it, but I think the only other thing I want to emphasize is that my experiences working in the Writing Center and taking on those other opportunities within the department during my MA, and kind of, being open to exploring other research avenues or other fields that I didn't think I was interested in. I think that really led me to kind of where I am now, because I was just really open to kind of exploring other things beyond what I thought I wanted to do. And I think it's totally, I'm over here now, whereas like when I was doing my MA, I was totally over here if we're talking about like disciplinary context. So I think just that openness to taking on those other opportunities was super helpful in me kind of figuring out and shaping my scholarly identity.
Thank you, Oddis. Sorry. Kyle. Sorry, my
I like that one.
Sunday Oddis, and I was looking at your last name. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay. That was, my laughter doesn't aim to undermine the important and meaningful points that you just.
You're fine. Don't worry about it.
Hopefully I won't make that mistake with Josh at this point. Josh, let's hear how your path is similar and different to the first two speakers.
Sure. So I'm happy to share a little bit about my path. I'll be candid that I think it's half kind of inspiring and half a word of caution, because I think I've done everything wrong at every step. But so just a little bit about my background, and I'll probably echo some of the points that have already been raised. But I actually did my undergraduate degree in science. I have a BS in molecular biology and minored in English. And I left Northeastern to work full-time at Weill Cornell down here in Manhattan. And I was doing genetics research for a while, and I liked that. And I realized that I was in the same trap that a lot of undergrads find themselves in after graduating, which is that there was no path forward for me for any career unless I went back to graduate school. And for me, there was really no way to envision a path forward that also didn't involve a lot more debt. So I sat with that decision for a while, and I figured if I was going to go back to school and I was going to take out loans, I might as well do it in something I was really passionate about, which was not genetics at the time. Now I kind of wish I had gone back in science a little bit sometimes, but I change my mind on this every day, and I only really feel like that when I had to do my qualifying exams. But anyways, so I was in New York. I didn't want to leave New York. I took a stab and threw applications into a couple local New York schools for PhDs, and I was only accepted into one program, which was NYU's master's program. And I was very disappointed about that. But in the end, I think it was a really great, great opportunity. I'll never forget being welcomed in on welcome day. And one of our advisors in the program had said, think of this as a gift. You're giving yourself time to really reflect on what you're doing. If a PhD is right, what your intellectual interests are, this is time for you, which I think is good advice. I mean, it's expensive time, but it is time. And my research plan completely changed. I had planned to go back to do a very contemporary project. I had planned to go back on something very connected to personal identities that I also hold. And in the end, I ended up working on 16th century projects instead. I fell in love with the rare book room. I fell in love with doing archival research. It really detoured me. I wanted to do a PhD. And I also didn't exactly know how to buy myself a little bit more time before I made that decision. And because I had done my undergrad at Northeastern, I had had a really great chance to study abroad twice. And I wanted to go back to Europe for a little bit while I had the opportunity to do that. And I knew that once I started my PhD, I would settle down someplace, just knowing myself as a person. And I was very lucky to actually be offered a fellowship through the European Union, where I completed another set of master's degrees in Europe, studying at a French university for a year and then studying in Italy at the University of Bologna for a year, which was really great. That really opened up a lot of doors for me, both linguistically, professionally, culturally. It really changed a lot of what I wanted to do as a person and as a scholar. I got to play in a lot of rare bookrooms I never would have had access to. And now that I'm putting together my dissertation proposal, that's amazing because I have so much evidence already to put forward, which is not a small thing during the middle of a pandemic when we're all stuck at home. And at the end of that time, I knew I wanted to come back to do my PhD, but being in Europe on your own on my own, had really made me think a lot about not just what I wanted to do professionally, but also what I wanted to do with my life. And so I made my decision for a PhD largely based on a holistic view. I only applied to a handful of schools. I only applied to schools in the New York area. I made the decision that if I wasn't accepted to them, I was going to take it as a sign and actually not do a PhD. Yeah, that was something that I felt very, very strongly. And I will say actually that because of the experiences I had studying in Europe, I entered into the PhD program a lot more jaded, I think, about higher ed than I would have otherwise. And I'm actually really grateful for that, because I think it's helpful to approach this with a little bit of skepticism about what it is that we're doing, about its utility, about the time we're spending, about the development we're getting. And I have been pushed to ask a lot of the questions that have been raised so far. Now that I'm in this, I wish I had been asked different questions. I wish people had asked me, what do you see your role as an educator? What do you see your role as in our larger society? What do you want to do with your research? Like, what do you want to do with the curation work that you're interested in? I wish I had been thinking a little bit more about that, because I think that those are actually the really foundational questions. Now that I'm in a PhD program, these are things I think that we don't really acknowledge until almost it's too late. So yeah, and then coming back to start my PhD, I had a very difficult choice between coming back to NYU, which is where I did my MA, and an Ivy League institution, which accepted me. And that was a very difficult choice. And I ended up choosing NYU. And I mentioned that not to brag in any capacity, but to say that one of the things I don't think gets talked about enough in this process is prestige, and sometimes how that overweighs better judgment. And I think that's really, really, really important to stress. I kept looking at this program at the Ivy League institution I was admitted to, and I knew it was the wrong fit in every single way. And I still debated it for about 3 months. And now that I'm back at NYU, I'm thrilled with my decision. I'm a few years accelerated in my program. I already have connections. I'm already ABD. I know that that was the right choice. It also helps to know your community in the middle of a pandemic like we're living through now. I'm very happy that I'm not someplace else. Yeah, that's kind of all I have about my path. I'm happy to talk more specifically if there's questions about the application process itself. The one thing that I would say, one thing that was difficult for me in the application process was deciding whether to stay in Europe or to come back to the US. And I actually want to emphasize that really quickly, because the US model of coming up with this generic application and applying and entering into something for a 6-7 year commitment is not the universal standard other places. And I actually think it's helpful to reflect on whether or not that's actually the best path forward for you. So I was in a position when I was applying where I could have applied to do my PhD at European institutions, and you apply with the dissertation proposal, not an application. And they accept you, and it's a 3-year contract. So that's a very different path than accepting this holistic American 6-7 year commitment with the big question mark at the end. So I think that's something to keep in mind too. There are a lot of options. It helps to think as big as possible. Worst comes to worst, at the end of the day, you just end up with more options to choose from.
Thank you. I'm so excited by the kind of kaleidoscope of experiences that you three bring to this conversation. And I'm going to have Professor Dillon now follow up with some observations from the Graduate Studies Committee.
Let me just echo Professor Beckler's comments about how great the comments that have come so far from the panelists have been, and how incredibly useful and helpful. So it's fascinating for me to hear as well what these paths have been and what your experiences have been. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I guess in part, reflecting, listening to what people are saying, one of the things I want to say, this is not just of the graduate studies hat, but just as a professor in the profession, there's a lot of debate. There has been for quite a few years for faculty, where faculty are told to say to students who want to go to graduate school, just don't do it. Whatever makes you think you want to do it, don't do it, because that it's unethical to tell people to go to graduate school now. And the argument for that is that the job market is just so abysmal that you are signing yourself up for 6 years of work that will lead you nowhere but into debt, and not to a job. And there's certainly some truth in that. The traditional path, I think, kind of no longer exists. That that sort of sense of going to graduate school for X number of years and then getting a tenure track job and da 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 da. That's the eye of a needle right now. And what that means is that as you were thinking about this path, the ground is literally shifting under your feet. The future of higher education, the pandemic adding to that is very uncertain, right? What hiring patterns are going to look like, what employment is going to look like, even what the disciplines are going to look like. So that said, my feeling about this is that the most important thing is not for me to say go or don't go. The most important thing is for people who are applying to have their eyes wide open, right? To have as clear a sense of what you're headed into as possible, so that you can make a decision that's right for you. And that is also actually germane to the application process, and to succeeding in the application process. Because I know that when I read applications, one of the things that I care about the most is getting a sense of whether the applicant understands what they're signing up for, or what they're getting into. Because I want somebody who's going to succeed in our program, right? I want somebody who is going to that is going to work for them, right? We don't want to sign anybody up for misery. So the sort of thinking of whether it's going to work is partly making sure that the person who's applying really understands, what it means to be a professional scholar, right? And so that term professional is an important one too, because when you sign up to do a PhD, it's a professional degree. And so even if the profession is shifting under our feet, it still means that it's a very different application, as a number of people have mentioned, from the undergraduate application, and even the MA application. Because one thing that I advise students when they're applying is, even though it says personal statement, it's not a personal statement, it's a professional statement. And treat it as a professional statement, a statement of your professional intentions and engagements. So you don't want the kind of anecdote about how you've always loved reading. Whatever you do, don't say that you used to read books under the covers with a flashlight at night, right? Just don't say it. I think that the advice that's been given so far is really superb. I mean, the things that Rhya was saying about really researching programs. So just to add to that, I would say that in your professional statement, it's not so much that you have to have everything figured out, but I think what matters is to display what your passions are about the profession, right? What is leading you? What do you care about that makes you think that you want to sign up for this, right? What sets your brain on fire? And that's, you know, that doesn't mean that you have to know everything about everything, but you should know what field you want to be in. It's great if you have some sense of what the current debates are in that field, and why they matter and why they matter to you. So Rhea's advice about going to conferences, I think, is helpful, because it gives you a sense of what is the professional conversation in this field right now, and is this something that I care about? Is this something that I'm interested in? The question of, you know, thinking about what it means for you. If you spend the next 6 years teaching, doing research, engaged in various projects, like is that a life that you really see working for you? And if so, why? So you want to avoid, you know, you want to avoid cliches, obviously, but just give a sense of what your engagements are, and why you care about it. This is underscoring things that people have said, but I encourage you to work closely with faculty who you're working with now on both your, just get as much information as you can, like what schools would be, do you see as a good fit for me? What schools would be good if I'm interested in this? Could you please read my personal statement? Could you please read my writing sample? I've had a number of students who have been really successful in the PhD application process who have actually done an independent study in their first year, spring of their first year, in which the focus of that is to essentially put together a writing sample, right? So so you really want to workshop your writing a lot with faculty and people who can give you good feedback on that. When I read the applications, the things that matter the most to me are the writing sample and the personal statement. The personal statement, to have a sense that the person knows what they're getting into, and understands the profession and what that means to them. And then the writing sample to show that that they can write, that they can think, and that they have a sense of the field that they're interested in going into. I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to respond to questions.
Hi, I don't know how to say I want to talk now. But I would love to kind of respond to a couple things that Professor Dillon just said. I think something, I don't know exactly what the makeup is of the audience that we have here, but I know that, you know, we're talking in context of the English department, and having been, right, an MA in literary studies and then moving into Rec Comp, like depending on the English departments that you're applying to, right, I feel like there's also sort of different disciplinary conversations and conversations about like professionalization and other opportunities that happen depending on the field that you end up going into as well. I feel that like I've definitely, I think a lot of what Professor Dillon said is super important about figuring out, like, imagining the kind of life that you see for yourself. And I think for me, I can see myself, you know, whether or not an academic track works out, I feel really equipped professionally to work in fields that aren't, you know, specifically academic in a traditional sense. And I think that has a lot to do with my research program and how I've worked with my faculty mentors to kind of develop that out and move my research into kind of other fields and do some sort of different kinds of work with organizations or institutions outside of our specific institution. And I think that that also, right, has to do with like my research program specifically, and like what I sort of did throughout like the path that I've taken so far. Like, for example, I took a statistics course as part of my coursework requirement. I had to petition to do that, but it was relevant to my research program, working with data and other kinds of things. So I feel like in the sense that it's a professional degree, it's not just for me about preparing me to become an academic necessarily. It's preparing me to participate in conversations within and beyond an institutional context as well. And I think having that framing and having that in mind about like, what are sort of the contours of your field and how can you engage like your scholarly work and research, not just within right your field, but also beyond the bounds of the institution, and kind of set yourself up and frame yourself to be able to kind of take other paths depending on what kind of comes in front of you, wherever the market or, you know, the world happens to be at that time. So I think also keeping like a pulse on what else is going on and how you might be able to, you know, dovetail the conversations that you're having academically in your field with other industries is, I think, something that's important and something to consider when you're looking at programs as well. How are they in terms of like interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, cross-disciplinary research? What kinds of opportunities do they have available for professional development beyond a traditionally academic trajectory? Because I think that is important, and it also, at least for me, assuages some of the anxiety that I have potentially now that I'm sort of nearing the end of my you know, my program.
So let me just second everything that Kyle just said. I think, and I don't know if that was maybe unclear from what I said. The traditional path, because it is kind of so dwindled, or you know, it's there, but it's not. You absolutely can't count on it. So that means that thinking creatively about what this degree means to you and where you might go with it, it's kind of there's opportunity and for that. And so that's why I was sort of emphasizing, you know, what is it that what is your stake in it, right? Because you can't just go by the carved path anymore, because that path just isn't carved. So the kinds of things that Kyle is talking about are hugely important. And part of figuring all of that out is continuing to take your own compass about what's working for you and what's not working for you, and what kinds of possibilities seem attractive or seem unattractive. Not only in terms of futurity, but in terms of like what's like, you know, what are you doing right now, even in the program itself.
Josh, you want to join in?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Now I feel a little bad because I feel like I'm playing a stereotypical like open your eyes kind of role, and I don't mean to do that, but I do think it's something important to say that there are also institutions that have their eyes open to what's happening in our profession, and there's institutions that blanketly do not and refuse to. And when you're looking for a program, you need to keep that in mind. So like, I wish someone had told me way earlier on, is the program that you're in accommodating? Are they aware of what's going on? Are they acceptable or flexible working with plan Bs? If you tell someone that you're really excited and passionate about teaching and want to pursue that full time, will people look down their nose at you because it's not a tenure track research position? That still exists. So it is on us to sort of blaze your own trail and find your own way through, but there are institutions that will make that harder for you, and there are institutions that will make that easier for you. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that was one thing that I felt was initially missing from the conversation, or not clear from the conversation. I also wanted to point out that several of you pointed to not traditional academic experiences that really made a difference in shaping your academic experiences and your choices. And this is something that came out a lot in the panels I hosted for on PhDs who had left the traditional path and were now working in humanities careers. A lot of them pointed to experiences they had that seemed at the time maybe tangential to their degree, that then became central in their intellectual fulfillment, even as professionals outside of the university, or working within a university structure but not in a tenure track position. I also wanted to follow up with one sort of minor detail in terms of networking, and none of you mentioned this, and I don't know if you do this, but I feel these inquiries all the time over email. Did you write to scholars at the institutions you were interested in joining in advance of the application? What was your communication in that way? How did you build community with scholars you didn't know?
I bypassed this entirely. I only applied places where I already knew people, and I was telling them in advance that I was going to work with them if I got accepted. So that was my strategy, and I think it worked.
Maybe this is more directed towards Rhya, since you mentioned you applied very broadly.
Yeah, I only reached out to, I think, 2 professors, and I also did not hear back from either of them. So I don't think it was a make or break. And if I were applying again, I probably wouldn't reach out, just because I don't really know what there is to say or ask, if that makes sense. A lot of those conversations I just saved where if I were accepted and got to talk to them, because there was a time to talk to them then where I would talk to them, when it was an option. But I think during the application process, it didn't really make sense for me to do that more, just because so much was still unknown. And there is a time where you can actually talk to them if you are admitted. I don't know if that's the wrong answer, but it's what I did.
Just a note on that it's not unusual for people in their applications to indicate the people that they would like to work with at the institution. And there's a right way to do that and a wrong way to do that. If there is somebody at that institution whose work really matters to you, and who you'd be excited to work with, then I think it's worth stating that. But if all you've done is looked at the list of people's specialty on the website and then you put them down, then it's very obvious that you have no idea what you're talking about. Because sometimes those faculty are like semi-retired, or nobody would want to work with them. And so the fact that you're listing them just indicates that you don't know what you're doing. So I would only encourage mentioning people that you want to work with if you know their work. And if it's quite genuine, right? I don't think you necessarily have to write to them and ask them, but you need to know that they are an active scholar whose work is significant in the field that you want to go into. Because the way that faculty, you get a form as a faculty member that says list your interests, right? List your academic interests, and then if you're as a student just looking through those, it doesn't. Anyway, don't do that.
Yeah, I have to say I've had people write who have really thought hard about my work, and then I'm very eager to engage with them, and then the bulk majority are just sort of like, oh, I'm interested in language theory and sort of random things I knew they plucked right from the website. And that, I think that actually hurts their applications anyway. But I don't know how the rest of you faculty feel about this. I like hearing from students who are really engaged, even in a prior email, really engaged with my work and have really thought about how Northeastern can work for them.
Most of the time they haven't. I mean, it seems to me that most of the people who contact me are, it's just a weird thing. It's like, I'm applying to the program, what can you tell me about it? Or, and the answer is, well, why don't you talk to somebody like, the head of the GSC? Or anyway, it's just, so unless, all of which is to say that there's a huge difference between just like a kind of scattershot thing and actually having a real engagement.
We have about 8 more minutes left, and I wanted to open the floor to the auditors of this session. Esma, Emily, or Bridget, would you like to pose any questions?
Yeah, so my question is for Professor Dillon. You said that you should be passionate about your work that you're getting into, and you should sort of indicate that in your personal statement. So I was wondering, without making it like super personal and talking about my life history or what sort of inspired me to do this work, how do you suggest like I talk about it in my personal statement in a more professional attitude?
Well, I think you want to talk about your passion for the field, you know, and for debates in the field. So you say like, you know, one of the key debates that is animating this field is the question of such and such and such and such. And this is a really vital question. I find this to be a really intriguing and vital question because it raises for me the following issues, something like that. So that's, it actually isn't, there's no need for it to be connected to a personal backstory. And in fact, well, I don't know, I'm sort of agnostic on whether it is. You wouldn't want it to be too much, but so that when I say showing your passion, I mean showing your passion for the intellectual work, for the scholarly work, right? So, you know, what are the issues that, you know, like I said, kind of set your brain on fire about this field? I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in there, but that would be the way that I would frame it.
One recommendation that I have is to ask the doctoral students in your program for copies of their personal statements so that you have a wide variety of models to see what kinds of rhetorical strategies people offer. These are never to be slavishly copied, as you know, but I found it really helpful to see the different approaches that people took and to think about how my approach differs from them. This is, of course, you know, a long time ago, but I always think having a couple models just to get a sense of what the genre itself looks like is helpful.
I know, Asma, I know that you're in EGSA, but the folks there, you know, they'd be great resources for something like that. And I saw that Bridget joined a little bit late. Hi, Bridget. I looked up Bridget's information. I saw she's a linguistics English combined major, which is awesome. Bridget, if you need, oh, thanks. Hey, look at you. If you want to connect with any current doctoral students in the program and you know, you're not necessarily in classes with them as an undergrad, just send me an email. I'm totally happy to set you up with people. I don't want anyone to feel like they can't, you know, bridge that sort of gap, because that's what I'm here for, is to help you with that.
Great, thank you. I do have a question, so apologies if it got answered in the first 15 minutes I was in a class. So how specific should I have narrowed down my area of interest that I would want to be studying before applying to a program?
I don't know that there's a magic answer to that. I still have people look at my proposals and tell me they're both too broad and too specific. So I think that really comes down to you and whether you're like, whether it comes across that it's a tangible project that you're interested in, or yeah.
I think another way to think about that is to articulate the questions that matter to you. Like what, you know, what are the questions that really engage your mind, and then say, you know, these are questions that in the field of linguistics manifest themselves in this way, and in the field of literature manifest themselves this way. And so in that sense, you don't have to, like, you know, specify a decade of a century that you're going to focus in, so much as give a sense of what it is that you care about and that has led you into this. And so sharing those questions gives, helps to define the field, but also defines your interest in the field.
I think also that speaks to like just knowing about the institution. And I think a big part of this process too is like not just trying to figure out what you can offer the institution, but what the institution can offer you. So I think looking for programs that also offer you opportunities to explore different things is important. So knowing that about your institution, and kind of like, at least for me, like I wanted to frame myself also in a way where like, this is the right fit for me, and you know, I'm the right fit for you and you're the right fit for me. So it's, you know, working kind of in both directions. And I think that also even extends to your potential colleagues and your grad student colleagues as well. You know, looking at what they're doing with their research programs and talking to the grad students as well. So I think, you know, if you're looking at institutions that have or provide opportunities for you to explore or kind of connect your paths and interests, and using questions, as Professor Dillon said, I think is a really good strategy. But I don't want to like also make it sound like you're just trying to frame yourself to be appealing to an institution. Like, that institution should also like appeal to you and fit you.
Josh.
Yeah, I just wanted to really echo that. That's a really, really important point. And this might sound hokey, but this is what I did in the process, and I really recommend that people do this. The process of applying, choosing programs, selecting programs, dealing with that with admissions is a crazy process for your ego. It does very, very weird things to you as you go through the process. I'm sure that Rhya and Kyle, you both will second that. And I think it really helped me at the beginning before this started. Just literally, I sat down and made a list and said, like, what are my personal values? What matters to me? What do I want out of my time, out of my life, out of this degree? And I had that written down before I started going through the process. And I used that as kind of like a guiding document as I went through. I think that really, really helped me. I really recommend other people do that. Because this is a professional degree, but unlike most other professional degrees, it demands huge personal sacrifices from you. So you have to have a good sense of like what you're willing to sacrifice before you start it.
And even like to echo that, as small as things as like where you are. For me, I was tired of Boston winters, which is why I'm in Texas. And like, that was a huge thing. And like, school is hard sometimes, but like my life is great because there's always sun, you know, like things like that are like not to be underestimated, because you want to be happy for you as well.
Okay, we are actually right at the 4 o'clock hour. If there are no further questions, I think we've covered some really significant ground. Okay, Heather.
Sorry, I have one really quick thing. I just wanted to speak to something Kyle mentioned earlier about having the money to apply to a bunch of different programs and how that can be a real barrier for people. I firstly want to acknowledge that. But I also want to mention, if that is a concern for you, every program you apply to, ask an administrator in that program if there's an opportunity to waive the application fee, because chances are there are, and they're just not well publicized to people. So for example, for any department in CSSH at Northeastern, if you attend a recruitment event, you can automatically get a fee waiver to apply. It's like super easy. I don't even think anyone really checks, honestly. It's just a box you like check off on your application saying that you attended an event. So that's like, you know, and I've had other folks reach out to me for other reasons, like financial difficulties looking for a waiver. We want to have good people, you know, in our program. So well, chances are we'll find a way to make it work for you. And I'm sure other institutions have something similar. So just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Heather.
Asma.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Thank you guys for organizing this. I learned so much. Just thinking about like next year, at this point, I'll be applying to my PhD programs. And like as a first year MA student, it's like very scary to think about, especially when you don't know your like research and what I really want to do. But I know that I want to do a PhD, but I'm still really not sure about my research. And my cohort, all the graduate students that are around me, they've been great. They constantly tell me if I need any help, I can reach out to them. But what is one thing that you guys would sort of like suggest or recommend in like getting past this phase of like confusion and knowing what you really want to do?
I think I want to first say that like I hear you and I get that completely, and that's like totally normal. And also, you know, I want to say like there's really not pressure apart from what you put on yourself in this scenario. Like if you need to take time to figure out a little bit more about what you care about and what matters to you, like school will hopefully right? Be there. And like we said, other experiences that you might have, like I took time between my MA and my PhD to make sure that that's something I really wanted to do. And I taught before I went back because I was trying to think about like, okay, I need to see how I actually feel about teaching at the college level. And I gave myself a little time. And I was a person who graduated undergrad early, you know, and I like, like I went straight through, and then I was like, you know what, I need a minute to just kind of breathe and process. So also, you know, I want to like validate what you're saying. And I also want to tell you, you can give yourself some space to figure it out too.
Thank you.
I also want to, in closing, direct you, all of you actually, if you're interested, to the recordings of the 2 panels that we held with our PhDs who had gone on to jobs outside of the university or tangentially related to the university. They were really impactful and powerful, and can help you kind of think about the different ways in which a PhD professionalizes you, as Professor Dillon emphasized. And Heather, I think we're posting those too. I keep asking you, we're posting those somewhere on the website, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna wait till all the panels are done and then I'll put them all up in one go.
All right, great. So I recommend that you look to those resources. Thank you again, all of you, all of the panelists, for providing your insights and recounting your experiences. And I see that many people have offered their email to follow up if you'd like to. This was really useful, and I think it will be useful for students to come in the future. All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.